Hello and welcome to the webinar, 5 Ways to Power Up Your Teaching with the SOLO Taxonomy. My name is Chris and my partner below.
Hi, I'm Tom.
So really excited to be with you here this afternoon. We do want to just take a moment to pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we meet today here in Australia and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. And I'm here on Bunurong land and continue to be inspired by the stewardship of country demonstrated by First Nations people here and around the world. And this is something which has and always will be a critical part of caring for country and essential if we're going to survive and thrive as humans. And I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge to all of you here this morning, this afternoon, because I know we have, I think, 12 people registered from Stonehill International School in Bangalore in India. We've got people registered from all over the world, which is really exciting. And just want to acknowledge you and the fact that if you're anywhere near us in Melbourne, it's like 31 degrees in a sunny afternoon near the end of the school year. So you've probably got lots of other stuff that you might want to be doing, but really, really so happy and so privileged that you've joined us because we do want to talk to you and to share with you what we think is a really useful model and to support teaching and learning. And what we'd love to do is just to remind us all as educators, whether we're in the classroom every day, whether we're looking after departments, whether we're looking after year groups, whether we're looking after schools or systems of schools, that the impact of our work has a direct influence on the lives of the young people who are in our care and therefore a direct influence on our futures. So no pressure, but that's the kind of work that we want to be doing. So I'm going to just kick straight across to Tom, who's going to kind of contextualize. Just as we move there, it's lovely to see. We've got Zita from Stonehill. Yeah. We've got Minnie here from Sydney. And we've got Mary Lou, who's a great friend. Great to see you guys. So please keep saying hello in the chat and any questions, pop them in there as well.
Thanks, Chris. So we're just going to set this in context. It's just worth just paying attention to some things that are influencing our practice at the moment. On the left here, a couple of provocations. There's lots happening, lots of narratives at the moment about assessment practices in schools, how we connect as a system and how we change as a system, and also thinking about how students develop and how we as educators help students develop their profiles of learning and what success looks like. And we just wanted to share some of these sort of thorny challenges that the SOLO taxonomy potentially contributes to and plays a role with. So we're thinking about a shared language of learning. And I know many of you responded to Chris's post on LinkedIn and, framing and thinking about, what is our language of learning within our school, within our team, within our classes with our students. How might we make learning growth visible? So how do we actually see with our own eyes? How do we experience it? How do we share that experience of change and development? And of course, that continuous challenge of helping a learner affect their experience and take control and have a direct effect on what is happening in their learning experience. And that central question of how we demonstrate learner growth, I think is really relevant. We believe that the SOLO taxonomy has the ability to affect practice, a very practical framework, but it also is a great provocation for us to think about how our assessment practices and the broader systems of assessment change as well. So it's worth us just setting this in context in the sort of spaces that we're on. Of course, a lot of these questions on the right are things that we've been grappling with for years. Chris, maybe let's just jump straight in and have a think about the actual taxonomy itself. You're here in this session with curiosity about it. Perhaps you've had a range of different experiences, and we're just going to frame up how our interpretation and what we know about the SOLO taxonomy, just to kind of get us started.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you. And I think it does bear the taking a moment just to say kind of where we started with the SOLO taxonomy and understanding that personally we were grappling with these questions many years ago and continue to grapple with them in some ways. But I remember coming across the SOLO taxonomy probably in about 2012, I think. No, way before that. This is when I moved to Australia. I'm very confused about which decade we're in. Maybe 2006, and I wrote some stuff in 2011 and 12. But the SOLO taxonomy itself has been around for a long time. And I can see that we've got Tracy from the sunny Bay of Plenty in New Zealand. And I'm sure Tracy has come across SOLO taxonomy is something that was used an awful lot in New Zealand, and looking at the NCEA and the kind of building of assessment practices in the early 2000s, or probably mid 2000s in New Zealand. But it's not a language which is necessarily translated a lot across into Australia and indeed around the world. There are some great practitioners, I think, up in the UK who use the SOLO taxonomy. But I mean, what is it? It's this taxonomy, which, as I say, has been around since the 80s, and it provides, to quote directly, a simple and robust way of describing how learning outcomes grow in complexity, from surface to deep to conceptual understanding. And in some ways, it's almost that it's certainly not a panacea, but I think in terms of educational mental models, which I know you're going to talk a little bit about, Tom, it really is a super useful lens for us to be able to turn that lens onto learning outcomes and to better understand how well kids are achieving learning outcomes based on the complexity of the learning that they're demonstrating. So it's called SOLO, and that is an acronym, and it does stand for the structure of observed learning outcomes. And we could unpack these words for quite a long time, but we're going reasonably quick in this webinar just to give you a lovely taster and some practical tools. But that idea of, first of all, believing that learning outcomes have a structure and that they actually can show us something, and a really well-designed learning outcome or a really well-designed proxy for learning can make that very visible, that structure of learning very visible, that it is observable. And when we talk about, and we'll probably use this word a few times, we'll often talk about proxies for learning. So what's the thing that demonstrates the learning? We can't MRI scan students in class to see the connections being made in their brains and then building those schema in their brains. But what we need to do is design really fantastic proxies that allow us to see that and approximate the kind of complexity as easily as possible, I guess. So kind of that's what it stands for. It's really about looking at students' learning and making a judgment and helping students to make a judgment on where they are at in their complexity of understanding around this specified learning outcome.
Yeah, so the only thing I would add to that, Chris, is just that piece about it being a taxonomy. And, you know, taxonomies are there to help us. This is one of the ways I was able to kind of connect with this, was just, it was able to, a taxonomy helps us to classify and to organize, to name and to label, to think about, okay, what is that I'm seeing? And it also connects with that question that we have, which is about how do we know that learning is taking place, which is a great provocation to us when we're trying to design something. And what we're talking about here is that in sessions, in lessons, in times when you're with your students, when you see something happening, when you observe that moment, when you get a signal, then the taxonomy gives us the chance to organize and to frame or to classify that signal in a really robust frame, to give us a sense of, you know, what's happening with learning. And I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, is just noticing signals and thinking, okay, a taxonomy helps me to classify them, and this is, you know, this as a part of your toolkit is going to really help.
Absolutely. So I think, Tom, you're going to take us through the levels, but a quick hello to Tracy and Rochelle and Gareth and Dan and Zita and Minnie and Nick Jackson, long time connection. And then Anya, delighted that Anya is on here and spending some time with us. So really, so many thanks for coming and hanging out for a little while. All right, I'm driving the slides, Tom. So when you're ready,
driving, indeed.
I can click the next one for you.
Often the SOLO taxonomy is represented as a set of levels. Sometimes it's described as having 4 levels, but what we're going to show is this sort of initial pre-level, which is called the pre-structural level. This is where a student is not yet able to share any relevant ideas about a particular outcome or something that you're learning. So this is sort of approaching a level of understanding, so a pre-structural. The next level would be a uni structural level. And so this idea of being able to share one or very few basic ideas perhaps the student needs lots of support to be able to get there, and has a sort of relatively surface level understanding of something that you're learning about. So pre-structural, uni-structural, you'll notice the language, and the next one is going to be multi-structural. And so each of these first few stages, levels, phases, however you want to describe them, steps, are to do with the quantity of the things that we know. And so multi-structural, what distinguishes this particular level of understanding is that I have many ideas. I can talk about those ideas, but I probably can't quite yet see the relationship, the connection, the bigger picture yet of those ideas. And so many pieces, I can list things off, but not necessarily coherently link those ideas together. And so pre-structural, uni-structural, multi, and then we move into, this is like an important junction, isn't it, Chris, from multi to relational, because you're moving from like a surface or a shallow level of understanding into something that's a little bit deeper, into more deeper waters. And that level is called the relational level of understanding. And obviously it describes it on the name of the, on the tin, it's relational. So we're able to relate those ideas, we're able to link those ideas. I can not only share the many ideas from multi-structural, but I can also explain coherently how those things link together, how those things have a relationship, whether that's a comparing or contrasting or showing how things are distinguishable from each other. That can be done with accuracy. And so relational is that first step into a much deeper level of understanding. And then finally, I'm not sure if it's there is finality, that absolute sort of sense here. That's probably for another webinar, but this idea of the extended abstract. And so learning that we observe, signals that we observe at this particular level, we're able to kind of notice how they have a really strong relational understanding, but also have really shown evidence that they have a conceptual level of understanding too. And often we talk about that difference. We've kind of gone from quantity at the beginning, pre-uni multi, to the quality of understanding, the quality of connections. And also it's, again, we're real sticklers for looking at the language that was originally kind of published, extend and abstract, so extension of what we know, but also abstract, so being able to zoom out and see a bigger pattern, notice how this connects with a different concept, notice how your understanding here links to something else, and be able to make kind of hypotheses and test and create is often linked with this extended abstract. So 5 levels: pre-structural, uni-structural, multi-relational, and then extended abstract, this sort of deep conceptual level of understanding.
I think one thing we always have to remember is that this is relating back to a kind of a defined learning outcome. So we're really trying to, what we're trying to do is understand better what we want the students to know or to be able to do. So, what are the kind of declarative knowledge that they have, or the functional knowledge that they can demonstrate through the application of skills. Like, there has to be some definition around that for this taxonomy then to be really useful. It's not something necessarily that you would broadly apply. It becomes a little bit more vague if you try to broadly apply it to a concept like communication. I am a good communicator. Now, you absolutely could, but it's really, really useful when students can see this in, I guess, thinking about the scale of it, seeing its smaller scale and steps they can take to help their understanding. And what I love about this is the way that it also reflects kind of the process of learning, of pulling knowledge together. And that whole like pre-uni multi is about that acquisition of knowledge, which when you get to the relational point is you could talk about that knowledge really being taken through the working memory and put into schema. So it becomes connected to other things. And those connections mean that learning is strengthened. It's easy to recall that learning because you've built it into a schema, which means there's a lot less cognitive effort in pulling that information out. And which is why I always think of relational almost in lots of ways as like, yes, you've got that learning outcome that we wanted. You're really there. You're demonstrating it. And in fact, extended abstract is much more about personalization. It's much more about, it's not like the next level you should aim for, because you can actually demonstrate it in so many different ways. What it does allow us to do is to look at students and see, wow, they've gone beyond that expected learning outcome, and they've really demonstrating their understanding in different contexts, and as you say, Tom, through hypotheses and things. And
just really interesting. Can I just add something just quickly in there? You know, that one thing that's worth saying is that these levels aren't distinct. Like, I'm no longer doing the other level. They rely upon each other. They build. So it's worth just looking at the graphic and how the graphic actually builds from and you know is from the same place. It's not so relational is using the parts that I've kind of created and understood. It's not creating something new, and I think that's a useful thing to think about, because often we can think that we can jump in like at a deeper conceptual level, but actually we need these pieces and these parts of this to sort of form that. You know, they rely upon it, and there's a connection down through the levels in order to be able to actually, you know, create a conceptual level of understanding of something. So dotted lines between is probably a good reminder, and the way that we kind of build the hexagons out is just a useful reminder that they rely upon the previous step. I actually was thinking today, Chris, about a different type of diagram, which is kind of concentric circles, you know, where it actually shows that it surrounds and it, you know, encapsulates everything that was done in that previous level. It doesn't start on something new.
So just a super practical example, and not particularly related to kind of potentially the work we're doing with curriculum and things, but that idea of riding a bike. When I'm at that relational level of riding a bike, I kind of get on the bike, I know what my feet are doing, I know what my hands are doing, I know how to keep my balance, I know all of those bits coming together, and I can say that I can really ride a bike, hopefully safely, when I'm at that relational level where all of those bits, all of those pieces have been connected. And I think that's the beginning of the automaticity, that's the right word, of having that kind of automatic ability to pull on that information and use it anytime I want to ride a bike. And the same thing is like, so what does that look like at extended abstract? Well, maybe I can actually step that up to what I've learned riding my bike. How is that the same and different to driving a car? Or how is that the same or different to surfing, or whatever it is? But I'm able to start to kind of keep building. And what we're looking for is complex, not too complicated, but actually complex, well-structured connections in our learning. It's well, I'm just going to say hello again. We've got Marlene, Jason, and Tanya, who've all joined us from the Gold Coast, Melbourne, and Perth. So it's wonderful to see you from around Australia and overseas. So thank you so much for joining us. So we at any time, if you've got any questions in that you want to kind of throw at us now, we can answer them. We can try and answer them, or we might hold them for the Q&A kind of bit towards the end. But we do quite quickly want to move towards this whole piece of, okay, let's give you some really practical tools. And it does require a little bit of kind of, okay, have I got this? Is this in my head? But hopefully the practical tools will help to clarify those things as well. Should we jump into the power-ups? Because we'll consolidate some of the things that we've got just on that slide. So we're going to talk about some strategies and ideas to apply this and apply this in our teaching, apply this in the design of learning. You know, when we're thinking about ideas to apply, big kind of fan of that ability just to go and do something with it. So let's have a think about some of these. First up, we're going to talk about your mental model. And what we mean by that is that the picture in your head of what the learning experience is, what's the pathway, the model of learning in your head that most of us experience. And as a practical tool, it's a great strategy for us to internalize those steps, the idea of moving through those levels, because it answers that. So it challenges us to think about that question on the right. You know, what is next? So when I'm experiencing something with a student, when I'm in dialogue or in conversation with them, and I hear a level of understanding that I can recognize now because I have that mental model, then I'm immediately thinking about what could go next. How do I ensure that signal is true? How do I ensure that I have a firm grasp of where that student might be?
but it also gives me some indication about what next. So for example, if I'm at a multi-structural level, where and in your head you have that mental model, you notice that somebody isn't quite there with the connections between ideas, you know that that's the thing that you've got to work on next, is some sort of activity that helps explore the relationship between the ideas that they have shown you they understand, but haven't yet shown you how to be able to connect and compare and contrast and distinguish. So your work is there, and it kind of gives you, when you have this mental model internalized, when you have it, it's easy to reach for, it's easy to notice, and you're able to kind of then move people on.
And I think that also, Tom, is so true. And I know we're going to talk about that in a second about language. But the most powerful kind of application of this mental model that I've seen is in video of some students using it, and some students talking about, like, what should I be doing next if this is where I think I'm at right now. And that for me is where that agency, that idea of, if we think of agency as kind of students taking responsibility for their learning, having intentionality, like really saying, I'm gonna do something about my learning, having self-regulation, so they're able to understand where they're at and actually kind of self-regulate, choose what to do next. And then so going from intentionality, self-regulation through to self-efficacy, to think, hey, hang on, I've got a language which allows me to talk about what I can do to get better. That's a really powerful thing for a learner, and all of that kind of feeds into that motivation. So that lovely kind of cycle, I guess, around student agency of intentionality, self-regulation, self-efficacy, and motivation is really played out when kids have got this mental model as well. So even though we use it a lot as teachers, I know that in our work we try and help kids to use that with some language. So that might be a useful place for us to go next.
Absolutely. So, if we have that cognitive toolkit that's the same as others, that's one of the most important things. I see learning in a similar way that you see learning, and so our disposition or our mental model is the same. The way that we might express or talk about learning is one of the most practical things that we can do with the SOLO taxonomy, is share some language. So notice on the slide here, we've just got some versions of the language from the original model. This is important because when I first saw the SOLO taxonomy many years ago, actually my first reaction was, I'm not sure I can access it using that language. And so one thing I've seen over the last decade is actually a real shift in the way that people talk about it. And actually one of the simplest ways that we can talk about the different levels, starting from Uni Structural, is just one idea, many ideas, connected or linked ideas, and then extended ideas. And so just that kind of concept of just simply talking about ideas. And we've just put some ICANN statements just as just an anchor and a reference here for this slide. But your language that you share, we're thinking in our mind about the structure, the cognitive structure of schema, but we're obviously talking with our students in a different way. Like, can you share more than one idea about this? Like, tell me what you know about our character so far, or the setting of our novel. Whatever the context or the outcome that you're focusing on, you're able to use an adapted version or an adapted lexicon to kind of suit, but you understand that it's coming from a really robust place in terms of a framework for learning. And I think that's a really important way in for all of us in terms of change, is to ask ourselves that question: do we share a language? Do we share a mental model of learning? Is that the same, or are we seeing things differently? I encourage you all to kind of grapple with versions of the language that you see, explore it, research how we describe the levels in different ways, because this is a great way into understanding it.
And just two little points to add into that as well, Tom, is when we looked at that in the middle, kind of the student-friendly, ready, one, many, that we chose that word ready, and we talked about, like, why is that a really important one? Because we don't want this to be a deficit model. So pre-structural, in a sense, is very much deficit. It's saying what you don't have. You don't have any structure. You don't have any knowledge in there. So we wanted to use that word yet. So I don't understand yet. And we wanted to use ready, so that even if kids are in that place, it's not a place of deficit. It's actually a place of, cool, there's some new learning to happen. And Pam Hook, who is an amazing New Zealand educator and has worked in SOLO Taxonomy for many, many years. And both Tom and I are massive fans of Pam's work. She actually uses I've seen her use hand signals, and I remember working with my colleague Diane at John Monash Science School in Melbourne, and we worked on SOLO Taxonomy with Year 12 maths methods students, and it was amazing to watch her team teaching, 2 teachers and 50 kids doing maths methods. And she would put something up on the board, and she'd be like, "Okay, let's do some self-assessment. Where do you think you are?" And you see all of these 18-year-olds. Oh, hello. We see all of these kind of 17 and 18-year-olds doing this language. So they would have a closed fist for pre-structural, like I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. They'd have a single finger for Uni Structural. They would have kind of waving fingers for multi-structural. They would do this kind of hand signal connecting for relational. And I can't do this in this camera shot, but basically hand on the head and jazz hands was for
jazz
extended
hands. Wow.
So yeah, obviously. So extended.
It's very expressive.
It is expressive. Extended abstract. So we've seen primary kids use those hand signals, this language, and these are Year 12 maths methods kids using the same signals because we have that shared language to help the teachers understand and scan that room to say, we've got a lot of, pre-structural here. So we really need to do something about that. Or in fact, we've got a lot of extended abstract. So let's pull that apart and change what we're doing based on the assessment data that we're collecting in a really simple but super powerful way.
I think that importantly there, that when we share language, we have a really strong sense of what it is I'm actually saying when I say this, it's worth investing in that because, that when you are sure you have, you're clear from what is being shared to you, those signals, like when a student is able to kind of express it with accuracy and precision, we have to be able to rely upon that. So that's something to continue to work on is, how do you kind of create a shared language, but how do you continue to sustain that over time? I think that's an important thing to consider.
Absolutely. Hello to, we've got a bunch of people, Pauline, Eliza. Oh, Carrie's in the house. Gareth,
Carrie's in the house.
Janine, great to see Gareth and Jason. So thank you so much for joining us live. I just want to call out all those people who are making such a big effort to be with us live.
Janine's saying how much she appreciates using that middle band of language because it's really positive. Where students are at. I do think that idea of I'm ready to learn, or I'm ready. I think that's interesting. The Uni Structural one is an interesting one because our question may well be at that level, but actually it shows us, what else, are they ready to step up into that place? So I think it's an interesting, addition. I think a lot of the time you'll see the SOLO Taxonomy represented with just 4 levels because, it almost feels like it's a null kind of level, like there's nothing to show for that, but actually that's where the work is. It's like that's us approaching this, that's activating the schema that are related, that's kind of building the map of what our students do know so that they are ready to step up and create that more clear set of ideas that build towards further understanding. So I think it's worth us thinking about the first 2 kind of levels of pre and uni, rather than just thinking it as just a 4-leveled kind of model.
And Tom and I often have discussions about whether there is another level beyond this, which we would call,
like
if we were going to have one, the secret level, which would be contract, and whether you get to an extended abstract level where all of this kind of zooms back in because you zoom out in the scale of the next learning outcome, where it kind of all becomes a unistructural piece of an even bigger outcome. But that's something.
Just think of Chris like in Minority Report, like that sort of version of it.
Yes, that's what I want.
Zooming and contracting. Let's talk about question design. So third power up for you, and the third way that you might, for today, how we might use this in a really practical sense. If you've got a good understanding, a sort of a clear understanding of how you might try and use this language, one of the best ways is to design your own questions. And one of the ways I like to think about it, and the way that we Chris and I often share and talk about this, is the idea of thinking about it in a sequence or a chain. So we might build up from the base here, thinking about a particular concept. And in this example, and I just find and replace here for anything that you're working on tomorrow or this week. Just think about whatever you're teaching or what you're learning with your students. And you can design questions, because each of these levels of the SOLO taxonomy guides us towards a set of language that we might use. So what is the weather today is a sort of closed question that kind of guides us to kind of think about a single idea, perhaps. Tell me some of the clothes suited for today's weather. In a sequence, I might ask both of those questions and respond differently. By the way, this is a kindergarten achievement standard in science. So, you can do it with any of those specific things in mind. But tell me some of the clothes. Obviously, that guides a learner to be able to talk about many. There are more than just one, or let's explore more. So the idea of giving many ideas, why are these clothes the best choices for this time of the year, is obviously a shift. We've gone, and there's a few things packed in there. So why questions are obviously something different. Talking about cause and effect is a relationship between different factors. And so built into that type of question, that question in itself is being pitched at that particular relational level. And so why are these clothes the best? So I'm assuming there's many best choices. Why would we even choose how would we choose for this time of the year? That's sort of intimating there's other things other than just, passing weather, that these bigger patterns. So we can start to be really picky about how we design questions that are specifically related to different levels, and how else do we adapt our behavior to different times of the year. The reason why that is stretching or extending is because of the cause and effect of an adaptation about behavior, and it is also opening the door there for the learner to talk about other things. So you'll notice that there's no reference in there to do with weather anymore, or seasons. Is actually framed in a way to be interpreted in many different ways. So it could be other things that are related to do, with celebrations or other types of things that are going on. And so the ability to keep questions designed, with that type of ceiling, like lifting that up and being able to kind of, guide and signal that this is a doorway for you to really stretch your understanding and show me what you know. The idea of designing in questions in a sequence like this is easy to do, is sort of sit down and think through those different types of questions. They could easily end up being, 5 sessions that 10 weeks worth of work you build around for, a group of kindergarten students, building up through those different levels in terms of reaching some conceptual level of understanding about how the weather affects human behavior. So it's a really simple way in, isn't it, Chris, just to design our questions using the different taxonomy levels.
It really is. And I'm just going to put in the chat. There's some great talk already in the chat from Paulie. Makes that beautiful point about pre and junior are absolutely vital, thinking of students who have challenges in their learning and where do they enter into this curriculum. So it's really wonderful. And again, that whole idea of demonstrating levels of success from Ginny, I think that's such a powerful piece. I'm just popping into the chat for everyone's perusal. Feel free to open that and maybe bookmark it. It's just a link to Tom's blog post on solo question chains, which has got a really lovely resource in there, just kind of demonstrating a beautiful image, which kind of demonstrates this thinking a little bit more. It always strikes me, Tom, that whenever we talk about questions I remember when I first started teaching in 2000, and we sat down in our training course to do a session on planning for questions, and it always struck me as such an important thing. And yet often when I worked with new teachers coming through, it was one of those things that they didn't plan for the kind of questions. And sometimes you just fall back into that habit of, asking pretty close questions. One of my favorite kind of strategies, which this applies beautifully to, is pose, pounce, bounce. So, ask that first question, pause to give everyone a chance to reflect and to think, and pause significantly. Like if it's a question worth answering, then it's a question worth thinking about. So pose the question, pause for 30 seconds and whatever minute, whatever you think it needs, and then go on to pounce and choose a student in the class where you think a uni structural question would be great for them. It's going to be a success for them. It's going to help them to enter into this. And then that next stage is bounce. So then bouncing that question to someone else to build upon, and possibly prompting them with, that multi-structural next level up. And so the whole piece around, once you have that mental model yourself, once you're thinking about your question design, it becomes an absolutely natural part of you engaging all students at the level at where they are at, and helping them then to move forward.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got 2 more power-ups. Time is flying by, Tom, as we knew it would.
Yeah, tell us about concept bubbles, Chris.
Concept bubbles are my favorite thing, like just in the world generally.
Just today, or?
And always they're high up there. And basically there are 2 ways I've always used concept bubbles. One of them is in my planning and my learning design, and one of them is with kids.
Okay.
So if I take, for example, I'm going to animate in a little example here. If I was doing some year 9 geography, and we were looking at geological activity and continental movement, one of my favorite topics as well. I think it was my favorite kind of mental canvas. So if my learning outcome is the theory of plate tectonics explains global patterns of geological activity and continental movement. Now this is me taking the designed curriculum, which is a term I know you use, and I learned from you, Tom, that idea of taking the design curriculum and then putting it into the enacted curriculum, so designing it into learning, and then the experience curriculum, what the kids actually experience. This comes very much from that design curriculum. So once I've done this concept bubble, I really need to start to look at, well, how do I enact it? But in my first stage of planning, I'm thinking, okay, so if that's my kind of relational, really, outcome, that's really what I want. The kids are able to connect tectonics and global patterns of geological activity and continental movement. I want to break down what's in there. And this might sound like really simple thinking for you, and you probably do this all the time. But what I'm trying to do is bring a lens of SOLO taxonomy to this. So what I've got here is kind of those concepts that I need the students to understand within here. So if they have a good understanding of each of these elements, but don't see how they're related, then they would be at that kind of multi-structural level. I definitely know that there's a lot of vocabulary in there actually that I need the students to know, and that's almost, if you think about each piece of those is starting at a uni and building up to multi-structural as well.
Yeah.
So I've kind of broken down my concept, my big concept, into the essential understandings that the kids need. And what I'm trying to start to do as well in my head right now is to map these out and to say, well, what connects to what's really important? How does this look if you have a really solid understanding of this? How does it look, and how do I physically represent that? And so often if I'm doing it without the limitations of using squares, you can use different size bubbles for the kind of the importance of a concept within a concept bubble. You can color code them. You can do lots of stuff. I love having the arrows and the connectors on them. So that's my planning. And then, and I'm going to show you this on Power Up 5, is I might translate this into some language which is really child-friendly, really student-friendly. And give them the concept bubble. And I always think about this.
Sorry, you go. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to ask whether you think about like multiple bubbles at the same time. Do you start to also zoom even further out to kind of see how, because we're talking here about sort of schema, aren't we? You're kind of, this schematic organization of knowledge and understanding. And so that's what you framed it as. So would you zoom out as well?
100%. And it's almost, it's the zoom lens is really useful because you kind of think, this is my unit level concept bubble. If I pull back further and I'm looking at my semester level concept bubbles, I'm going to have several of them. I might want to look at how they interact as well. And that's a really beautiful thing. And if I zoom into like I've got a 45-minute geography lesson, that's all I've got, is I might zoom into one of those green and just be looking at destructive plate boundaries. So it kind of gives you that zoom level, allows you to zoom. Sorry, I'm moving my hands a lot. It allows you to zoom in and out and to understand where kids are at. And I give these to students, as I say, because I think it's actually really useful for them to see the big picture and not understand it all. And that's okay. And even I've got examples where you color them in as you go, or you tick them off as you go, as you build that understanding. As students tick them off as they build their understanding. And that idea of going from, I often give the analogy of the gingerbread house. and the crumbs, the Hansel and Gretel. And I know I've used this analogy before with some people in this call. I think Janine and Gareth have heard this before. But the idea of like, how do we help kids if we just give them the crumbs, the Hansel and Gretel crumbs in the woods? They're only really seeing the next thing. And for some students, that's very limiting. It's a perfect point of access for some students, but for some students, it's also a bit of a glass ceiling on what they can learn. And then if we give them the gingerbread hats, if we give them the big picture and say, let's look at the crumbs individually, but this is what it's going to get you to, this big idea, it's actually pretty motivating and actually really useful as a formative assessment tool. So I guess building on that, and for our final power up, I'm going to share solo growth ladders. And what we're going to do is, I do have a bunch of these, which I'll show you in a second how to make your own copy of them. But the idea of a solo growth ladder for me comes from my deep pain and misery and hatred of lots of rubrics that I've seen in the world.
I've experienced some of your pain and misery firsthand.
Well, you know how angry I get, right? You get so angry.
You get very angry.
And there are some terrible rubrics. Growth ladders definitely aren't perfect, and we're not really a rubric, but they're trying to answer the question of, how does a student know where they are at against a particular outcome? How do they know what they might be able to do to move on to the next step in this kind of understanding and moving from like unistructural to multistructural? And so I have a bunch of growth ladders. A lot of them are context specific. So I've got some examples of some French language ones, lots of examples of primary, which you've got, Tom, and we've got lots of examples of different subjects, some really great maths examples where teachers have sat down and thought, here's my learning outcome. And what I've got here is collaboration. So what I'm going to say is, for this one, we're actually taking the Australian capabilities, the general capabilities in the Australian curriculum, I should say. And I've taken collaboration as one of them and tried to say, all right, what does that look like? And I've said, I see the value in working with others to achieve common goals. I look for the most effective ways for us to work together and maximize the use of our talents. That is not the only possible ever definition of collaboration, but it's a really good chunky thing for students to work on. And so you'll notice straight away that the learning outcome is written in the first person. That's number one. Like power up, sub power up 5.1 is writing this in the first person, because this is a tool for kids as much as it is a tool for teachers. So that's the first thing. Is you'll see what we've got in the different colored boxes here going up the growth ladder. Come back. Is pre-structural, I don't yet value working collaboratively. Then we've got uni structural. In a situation where I'm asked to collaborate, I will complete any tasks I'm given. Multistructural, when I'm asked to collaborate, I complete tasks and seek to find other areas where I can add value. So if you look at those, I have color-coded them. Some people like that, some people don't. It's kind of a traffic lights type thing, but whatever works for you. You'll notice that there are also these light gray boxes here. And these light gray boxes are called Move Me On boxes. And basically all they do is give a suggestion. It's not everything you could do. It's definitely not every single strategy or every possible way to help you to move from one box to the next, but it is a suggestion. And I started writing these in there because of that whole piece of where you see kids with their hand raised in a salute to kind of learned helplessness, like not knowing what to do next until the teacher comes and kind of gets them out of there. And what I wanted to do was to give them something, give the kids something that would help them to move from one level up to the next. So these gray boxes are just, they move me on. I'm glad the dog's excited about solo growth ladders, by the way, Tom.
He's very excited.
My dog is banished to the garden. Is the idea that we can basically help kids by giving them a suggestion to move on to the next level. So as you go up this ladder, each of these gray bits with the arrows, these gray blocks, is kind of, if you see yourself at uni structural, here's one thing that you could do to help you to move up to multi-structural. And there are 3 different dimensions or 3 different ways I use growth ladders. Number one, I pre-fill them entirely like this, and I'll share them with kids. That works. That's fine. The second way I use growth ladders is to take out all of the Move Me On boxes so they become blank. Show this to a whole class, and we do a reflection session on, okay, Tom, if you thought you were at multi-structural against this learning outcome, what do you think you could do? Or what could we all do? And we kind of brainstorm ideas together about strategy. So there becomes a level of ownership over the growth ladder, and it's produced and co-constructed as a class. And then the last way I use these is to take away the move me on boxes as well, keep them blank, and use them in kind of coaching conversations with individual kids to help them to set targets. So coming back to that idea of student agency being things like intentionality, so having a goal, so saying, right, I'm here at the moment, this is what I want to do next. Self-regulation through to developing that sense of self-efficacy and motivation. This is just a tool which helps students to feel like they've got something to hold on to, which isn't too abstract, which allows them to see those smaller next steps. So we do have a bunch of these available. I'll just, I will put the URL. I had copied and pasted and it didn't work for some reason. I think it's my bad. Growth letters into the chat. So please feel free to have a look at that. And just while, Tom, if we're going to, while we are going to summarize in a second, I'm just going to really super quickly go off script. Tom's going to kill me for this. Growth letters, there we go. Is if I'm going to have a look at growth letters, this is what you'll get by going to that link. And just to help people to navigate, because I don't mind, but I often get emails from people saying, oh, I'd love a copy of this. And all I'm going to say to you, all you need to do is, it tells you how to make a copy on here. There's some people in already, which is awesome. But if you use Google Workspace, then File, make a copy of the entire presentation. That will take it into a copy into your drive. If you don't, if you use some other kind of slide-based product, then you can go down to download, and you can download them as a PowerPoint. I suggest you do either Google Slides or PowerPoint, because you can then edit them. So they become an editable thing for you. You can always download them as a PDF as well if you want. So there's a bunch of them in there with kind of the associated behaviors. Most of these ones focus in on the capabilities, but the idea is there to help to support your thinking around that. All righty, Tom.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the difference. I think Janine sort of called it in the chat there, and is that often rubrics miss this part, and even the SOLO taxonomy. A well-written rubric using the SOLO taxonomy, which there are plenty, by the way. It's off. There you kind of start googling around that, you'll see many, but it's missing that piece which helps me as a learner know what to do next. Where do I keep going? How do I move from here to here? It's all very well showing me or telling me or even understanding that this is my understanding here, but how do I get to that next sort of place, whatever that place is? And so that question of what next is always running through our work with the SOLO taxonomy, because we often feel that that's the missing part, is that it can be represented as a level, as a place that feels quite static, but in fact it's quite dependent, connected, and also fluid. And we need to help our learners continue to make strides towards a deeper or conceptual level of understanding. So that's the biggest difference between these and a normal kind of rubricized solo, kind of using the solo levels, is just that additional part of saying, okay, what could help me move on? At the kind of conceptual level of solo, we're obviously going from, I'm not ready yet, one idea, many ideas. So I need to go from one to many, I need to go from many to linked. So I need to think about how these are related. I can relate them, but I can also extend that understanding and show my understanding at a much broader level, and how often it sort of jumps out of this concept into something new, and I can bring other ideas in. So just that ability to think about moving on is a really powerful, focus that, the growth ladders give us. So we've had 5 power-ups. So your mental model. So part of your cognitive toolkit. This is the way I think about learning. This is the sequence that we're on. This is the journey of learning that we're on. That also being shared, we express that mental model through a shared language. Has obviously a powerful, one of the first things we often talk about with schools and with teachers that we work with is this can be the base of a shared language that you can, invest in over time. a very practical way to use that language is to design questions. So designing better questions, designing really precise questions that give you the right signals at the right time so you know what to do next. And then Chris just took us through there a couple of slightly more advanced uses of the idea of planning using bubbles or concept bubbles, but that idea that it's connected because we can look at the pieces and those arrows sort of start to think about the dependencies and links and connections. And obviously growth ladders we've just covered there as a version of using the SOLO taxonomy in some sort of rubricized way that enables and empowers a learner to be able to have a map of learning and know where they are in that space and know how to chart a course, you know, to a conceptual level of understanding.
Absolutely. And we've got, I just want to pull out Pauline's comment because I realized I forgot that I was going to use the magic power to pull up people's awesome questions. And this is awesome comments. This is also an excellent segue to remind people we've got one more thing that we want to talk to you about. But if you've got any questions or anything that we can answer now live, like please just pop them in the chat and we will.
Yeah.
I love Pauline, and I've had the privilege of working with Pauline for quite a while now, which has been awesome. The idea that the power of, or I guess the disempowering nature of some traditional rubrics as being seen as something that replaces student-teacher conversations and dialogue. And actually a growth ladder is designed, it's the contrary of that. It's designed for dialogue. It's designed to be used by students and teachers and students and their peers to talk about learning. And that's why I think one of the other factors that I like about it is the first person. It's about me, it's about my learning, and I can discuss that with somebody else. So wonderful comment. Thank you so much, Pauline. And I'm so glad I remembered how to use the putting the comments on the screen there, Tom. So if anyone else wants like their question or their comment in lights a la Broadway, then feel free to do that. Mm-hmm. But we've got a reunion happening now. So I think Eliza went to
having a little moment.
I think Eliza's in Saigon now, or somewhat. I think, is that right? Ho Chi Minh City. Amazing.
So Nick's got a question here. So if you could put that on, Chris. So how do teachers, students deal with doing some of what is required to be at a certain level? It's doing some of what is required. So, okay. So one of the things that we want to be able to do at the design level, and this is a point of where does this begin, you know, so let's think about the whole journey. Nick, you might be referencing that moment where you're with students kind of showing and demonstrating their understanding, but it also goes all the way back to the questions we design, the sequence that we design, the experience that we're designing, because we might be tuning in to the signals that I'm looking for. So the things that will show me, this is the conversation we mentioned briefly about the idea of having really good proxies for learning. So this will demonstrate to me that these my students are able to link and connect their ideas. This particular activity, task, discussion, whatever it might be, experience, I am looking for this from these students at this particular point. So that precision, I think, starts in the design stage, doesn't it, Chris?
Absolutely, and I think that's and we haven't spent a lot of time on proxy, and we haven't spent any time on proxies, but the idea that a proxy is really deliberately designed. And I think one of the things is, for example, concept bubbles, growth ladders. There is work right at the start of a learning experience, which may last, let's say it's like a 4-week kind of unit. We're spending time right at the start to better understand what that big picture looks like, what the concept looks like, where the growth, so none of it's a surprise. It's not coming at the end and it's a hoop you've got to jump through. But also, and this is something that we talk about in the course, which we're going to talk about shortly, is this idea of designing proxies which are really powerful and deliberate, and we know are going to help to surface. So the kids or the teachers aren't like looking around to try and figure out what I should be doing to move, what I should be doing to move to that next space. Like the proxy helps them because we've designed that to think, what's the best way to show them that? I'm just going to pull up Nick's follow bit. Yeah, well, brilliant, because that's a really powerful discussion to have, because in collaboration, the student assists peers in certain tasks, but not others. So you know that you've got some kids who, for example, in that collaboration example, will be amazing when, let's say, they're playing basketball or they're playing, they're in a team, and you see them collaborate and you think that's amazing. But I tell you what, when you come into my French class or my maths class, like, you don't want to work with anyone, right? And that's actually a really interesting dialogue to have around that collaboration. And it almost sits at that level of reflection, sits at the extended abstract level, to say, well, what is it about when you are collaborating really well, when you're playing a sport, for example, what could we translate into when you're in my maths class? And that's that conversation and dialogue. I was going to dialogic piece that Pauline pulled up as well, I think. But that's a really thoughtful point, Nick. Thank you so much. And again, some great comments in there from Pauline too. I'm just looking at the time, Tom. Shall we kind of? We're happy to still take some questions, but we do want to share some. Tom's going to share some thoughts with you. Oh, I forgot about the Q&A slide. Here it is. We're just going to skip across it now.
Yeah, so we have a course that we have available online. If you're interested to go another step further with your understanding, I know there's a few people in this session who are already enrolled and have the chance to kind of participate. So Chris and I created this online course, self-paced online course last year, 5 chapters, lots of lessons. We've got hours, and you can immerse yourself in video instruction just like this, 15 PDF tools. And also we've got this great workbook, haven't we, Chris? This we've got this 100-page, I've got mine here, which so there's this lovely kind of workbook that is accompanying. It's got growth ladders and all the bits that you kind of need. So this comes with as a digital download with the course, and also a micro credential. So if you skip through the next couple of slides, Chris, we've got we've been credentialing people who've completed the course. It's self-paced, and so once you finish, you automatically get yourself a little credential from us saying that you've been able to work with SOLO Taxonomy and been thinking about capturing learning growth. And that's some of the language that we use in our course, is the idea of capturing. How do you capture, learning growth when it occurs? What is it that we can actually do? That's one of the central questions that we explore. A couple of screenshots on the next slide, Chris, if you can, from our workbook. So we've got, you can see there some of the concept bubbles that we've worked on. Lots of really, really useful thinking tools that we've baked into this course, that supports the work. So we've been looking at pulling from the things that we know and associating it with, the work within Solo, and sort of really building out from that central model, lots of techniques and strategies and tools that can equip you in terms of your understanding of it, and also sort of developing your assessment practice. And we've got an offer for you, so you managed to stick around. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I know many people will be joining us in the replay as well. We had over 120 people register for the course, for this webinar. And I know that many of them will be joining us in their own time and when they can. And so we've got a 10% discount for enrollment on our online course. If you use this code, Chris is dropping in the link in the chat. And so that's in there now. And you can also even put a little QR code, because we all love those now. The discount coupon is Solo Web 10, and that will give you a 10% discount for your personal enrollment. If you do that before next week, so that's the 7th of December. Chris, we also have been working a lot with schools who are enrolling groups of people, haven't we? I know that Pauline and a few others in the chat are part of a group from their schools. If that's something that you're interested in, if you want to, share with colleagues or talk to others about what, joining together in a small group, or thinking about a little study group or a professional learning community, whatever you're doing. And even if it's for next year or whenever, just send me an email. We've got some great discounts for sort of larger group enrollments on the course as well that we can offer. And we've got all the back end set up for invoicing and purchase orders and all that sort of stuff. So we're really used to working with schools in that way. So it's nice and easy. So yeah, we're really excited to offer this little discount for you to personally get involved in the next week, or stay in touch and let us know if we can support you in the weeks to come.
So if you haven't had enough of these two faces over the last hour, we do invite you to come and hang out with us in our virtual course. Lovely to see so many people who have joined live at this kind of challenging time. I'm just going to call out Mr. Moore, PE, who says it was an interesting talk, which is beautiful. Thank you. He is joining from the UK, and it's 5 a.m. here. So yes, I feel that pain. And I actually realized, Tom, it's our anniversary today. Not our anniversary, but the anniversary of my family of moving to Australia. 10 years ago today, we left the UK, but I can still remember what 5 a.m. in the end of November feels like. So
obviously the weather as well over there.
It's not ideal. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to hang with you. And we're going to do an awkward wave now until we end this broadcast. So take care, stay in touch, and we hope to see you in the online course. Awkward wave, Tom, you ready? Do it.